Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. For today's episode, I'm joined by a guest host. You've heard him before, and he's back again, my friend Dean. And today, we're going to be talking about alien abduction cases. How are you doing today, Dean?
Pretty good, Chris. How about you?
Not too bad. It's a nice Friday afternoon out here on the East Coast. And I'm sure where you're at, it's paradise every day.
Actually, I am in Hawaii. However, it is shit weather right now, and it's been shit weather for the last couple months off and on. So it is raining. So you probably have better weather than me.
It's a little cloudy, but no rain. I'll take it. So alien abductions, man. This is something we've talked about frequently on and off again for I don't know how many years since college days.
Yeah.
Like alien abduction cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the validity of them and whether, this is just a figment of someone's lucid dreaming that everyone for some reason just because they hear someone have a similar type of dream and then they dream about aliens. But one thing I do notice with all of these abduction cases, they share some similarities with the way that the aliens look, the UFO craft, and basically what they've experienced while they were there. What are your thoughts on that, man?
I mean, I think there's so many rabbit holes to go down, but I think the first place that jumps in mind for me is what the aliens look like. And just like you were just saying, people share these stories and these ideas, and I think a lot of them can be borrowed from what we perceive as humans, to be something that is anthropomorphic or something that looks like another human being. And that's the thing that fascinates me about aliens as we get further down the road in terms of our understanding of the universe, as our civilization ages and gets more mature with their knowledge. I think that there's this interesting concept that if other life evolved somewhere else in the universe, it theoretically should not look like us. It shouldn't be bipedal. It shouldn't have 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 sets of eyes standing upright. It should look completely and utterly different, with, different types of senses and whatnot. So the fact that aliens, as we perceive them as humans, look humanoid, that is very, very interesting to me. And I know there's a lot of theories we can talk about, and we probably will touch on. But I know one theory just off the top of my head that might help explain that is this idea that aliens who are visiting us now in this era for the last few thousand years or earlier are somehow humans who have evolved way beyond what we currently are at, and they're coming back in time somehow to maybe set things differently or whatever the theory is, testing, learning science, whatever you want to float for a theory. But that to me seems more likely that aliens that exist in the perception as we see them today in media and what people claim to see, it makes more sense that they came from us somehow or we came from them than it does for them to have evolved 1 million+ years ago in some other galaxy, just happened to look like us with 2 eyes, 2 legs, 2 arms, etc. So I don't know. What do you think about that, Chris? What do you think about how they look?
Well, my thing is why they have to somehow span from us. Isn't that kind of really, I don't know if this is a word or not, but I'm going to use it, very human centric type of thinking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if you take a look at the pictures of space from the Hubble telescope and all these different telescopes that we have now, right? And you see all these distant galaxies, these distant stars, these distant star systems. Isn't it within the realm of possibility for one to believe that there is life out there that didn't span from humanity? Mm-hmm. Because if you have, let's say, for all intents and purposes, just a really super out there ridiculous example. Let's say these aliens that are coming to quote unquote abduct these people somehow managed to travel from the Andromeda galaxy. They've developed the type of technology that is required, whether it's maximum warp speed or times 100 warp speed or the speed of light times 1,000 or something like that to make it from the Andromeda to the Milky Way, what would the correlation be to us? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm not trying to challenge you in particular, but challenge that theory that somehow that it has to be, you know, humans from the future that evolved to look like these gray blobs of nothing with just these, like, they're super scrawny and they have these black eyes, that somehow we came of that, or they be like, that's what we turned into.
Right. And I can talk to that a little bit. There's an interesting theory that I don't have queued up completely in my memory bank right now, but I can kind of talk to it a little bit. And I remember one thing I learned was, so we're carbon-based life forms, right? So the genetic makeup that comes from our environment is based off of carbon. I think there was a discovery made like a decade ago or so, I think from a Chinese scientist or something. There was some kind of discovery about a life form on Earth that was actually not based on carbon like all other life forms we've ever known of. It was actually based on arsenic. So that means that arsenic, which can easily kill us, carbon-based life form, because it's counterintuitive to that structural makeup of the carbon, it can actually thrive and survive in an environment that would be poisonous to us. So that's just one basic example of how, if life evolved very, very far away from us, it should have theoretically spanned off into different types of, like generating different types of beings and different looks and different senses and different ways they manage themselves. So that's one thing that I wanted to bring up with the idea of aliens visiting us and abducting us. Is a lot of people talk about how, you know, they show up, they're essentially naked. You know, they don't have any spacesuits. They don't have anything that's very clearly something to protect them from our environment. So that theoretically, you could argue that either they breathe oxygen, or they have some means to survive in our atmosphere. However, if you would imagine, you know, some life evolving from the most basic life form, you know, millions of light years away from us, that planet that life form evolved on, it should have different gravity. It should have different elements and different base elements. So therefore, I think that you could argue strongly that aliens evolving on another planet away from us, separately from humans, should theoretically look different. So that's why I kind of argue this idea that either aliens came from us or we were somehow retrofitted by aliens to mimic them in some way. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think about that concept as well? Like, you know, the evolution and the fact that there are other incorporating ideas of, like, you know, biology and chemistry and stuff that would affect the development of other beings from the most basic form of life on other planets.
So this will probably be a very simplistic answer, but what you just mentioned, evolution, right? Species evolve based off of some sort of need, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it plausible to say that these aliens, based off of, let's say they walked on four legs on their home planet, but some sort of thing happened,
like apes. Yeah.
Right. That necessitated for them to want
stand upright.
Yes, stand upright. Yeah, that's
I totally agree.
much, yeah, that's pretty much what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
To me, given the size of the universe and for the purpose of this conversation, all of the possibilities are infinite.
Mm-hmm.
And within that infinite set of possibilities, bipedal aliens that are carbon-based, silicon-based, maybe, like you mentioned, even arsenic-based, it's possible, but it's all dependent on their evolutionary needs.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I think that, you know, depending on the structure of their bodies and whatever, there might be a benefit for them to learning to stand upright and function in that capacity. The only interesting thing so for instance, you know, we have two eyes, and those eyes give us these visual sensory inputs from the light reflecting off of objects around us. But we also know that there are different types of life forms who are are carbon based, but they interpret data in a different way. Like some fish don't have eyes because they, like you said, they adapted from evolution to a depth where their body didn't need to generate eyes. So they had no need for them. So they're essentially blind. I think it's like cave fish or something like that. They float around and they hunt for particles of food or whatever by just, I think, echolocation, and just like bats as well. I mean, bats do have eyes. But going back to this whole concept of, I think we can bring it back more to the alien perspective, which is, we see aliens as a human race as being bipedal, and we report them as being as such, which to me in itself is super interesting. And that might segue into this next idea of how alien abductions have evolved over the last like 30 or 40 years or so. So I know you and I did a little bit of research to find out what some of the most intriguing cases of alien abductions have been in the past. And do you want to talk about maybe really briefly the very first one in mainstream media that we've seen, Betty and Barney Hill in 1961?
Oh, absolutely. That seems to be the most common one that everyone uses within like alien abduction documentaries. That is the earliest and the most famous abduction case that we do have. Essentially, the story goes that they were driving down a road from, I believe, like a road trip in rural New Hampshire. And then they just saw this bright of flashing light in the sky hover over their vehicle. And next thing you know, they're taken aboard a spacecraft and they start undergoing medical examinations.
Yeah, and I'm totally. I think you probably know more about that story than I do. I know I've heard that story before on like shows like Ancient Alien and whatnot. But I don't know if you want to if you want to go this route or not. But to me, the thing that jumps out as most interesting in a situation like that is that was really the first time in modern American history where you had somebody openly claim that they were abducted by aliens, and those two people were put under a lot of scrutiny, especially for their biracial relationship, because back in the 60s, a white woman and a black man was probably seen as taboo by a lot of people. So that is so interesting to me, because even if you make the argument that couple fabricated that story, it doesn't make sense to me why two seemingly normal people who are just living their regular lives and trying to survive, why they would throw themselves out there in such a way, even if it was if you want to argue that they were getting attention for, whatever, biracial couple, et cetera, they were in their I think they were in their late 40s or even in their 50s when they made that claim. So to me, it just does not fit psychologically with a normal human being to take such a risk to make that claim. So that, to me, that automatically gives some viability to the story. But can you talk about, I don't know, maybe that you can kind of like teach me a little bit and help me learn about, do you know anything else about the actual story, like what they talked about in terms of what the aliens look like, or what tests might have been done on them, or what might have been said to them by the aliens, etc.?
So what I do know about this case is that they do describe the aliens as everyone commonly knows, the gray aliens. So the little short gray aliens. And apparently like they would undergo like medical examinations. And the most common thing that all abductees talk about is like they'll have like needles inserted into their nasal cavities. They'll have like their fluids drawn, and kind of like they're in a doctor's office, but they're in a spaceship.
Right.
That's the best way that I could think of to describe.
That makes sense. For whatever reason, they thought that something was happening to them that was unexplainable, but they still stepped out from the safety of their home and they put themselves out there. So what do you think, or what exactly did they talk about in terms of the abduction? Were the aliens supposedly benevolent, or were they malevolent? Were they good, bad, or were they kind of just from a perspective, like a medical perspective, just like probing them, not good or bad?
So what I know about the case is that they both underwent hypnosis sessions, and that's when they were able to recall what actually happened. Yeah, so basically they underwent hypnosis sessions, and essentially when their vehicle was stopped, they were told, I don't know whether it was verbally or telepathically, to not be afraid. So
Interesting.
it definitely, it doesn't seem like there was any malicious intent on the part of the aliens doing the probing or the abduction. To me, with this case, it sounds like they were doing research on humans, if you want to put it that way.
So something else jumps out to me about that story, which is absolutely fascinating, which is a lot of people have talked about aliens and grays or whatever, like if they are truly evolved by millions of years or whatever, and they have advanced by millions of years and they've reached this level of technology. The thing that I find fascinating is theoretically they should have evolved. I mean, I don't know this. I mean, this is just, this is all theory, but theoretically they should have evolved way above the emotions of human beings. If they were a pure knowledge-based society, their whole goal is to learn, and they clearly don't have sexual organs. They probably reproduce by some genetic means or duplication means or something like that. So there's no actual sexual reproduction, which means there's no need environmentally for a close relationship, other than maybe they have evolved some other way to be more intimate in a mind level. But if there's no need to have a or like a physical engage, like intimacy level of relationship, why would they even bother telling them to be calm? Because if they tell them to be calm and tell them that everything's going to be okay, that means that they still understand human psychology and that it needs to be kind of more or less like fluffed up. And we humans kind of need that support psychologically. So it's interesting to me that they're saying that the aliens made an effort to address their psychological need. What do you think? What do you think about that?
I definitely think so, because let's put it this way. The aliens, in this case, being from a very advanced civilization, they're making their way to different parts of, let's say, the universe or the galaxy, if they're from the Milky Way galaxy, to do exploration. And then they come across a planet where they see intelligent life. I think from that perspective, a scientific perspective, the same way that we would examine like an animal, I think that's the same approach they would take. Or kind of like a doctor patient. Like you go to see the doctor, right? And you're kind of nervous. The first thing they'll do is they'll relax you.
Right.
They'll assure you like, hey, everything's going to be fine. We're just going to do this examination. We just want to make sure, make sure nothing is wrong. But in the case of the aliens, it's not going to be the case of there's nothing wrong. It's more so maybe they're just trying to gather intel on intelligent life throughout the galaxy. And they probably, if we look at it from the perspective of the aliens, which I know is kind of far-fetched to do, right? Because that's really hard. But if we're in their shoes, let's put it this way, and we're going from planet to planet, and we're trying to analyze and understand the species of each planet that we come across that has intelligent life, we're not just going to yank them screaming and yelling. They're just going to be a complete state of panic. You know what I mean?
So I think, I totally agree with you. In one perspective, though, that's really interesting to me, going off of what you said, which is the fact that they are psychologically, or they're aware of our psychological need, and they took the time to address it. But you were saying how, if they didn't understand that, why wouldn't they just yank us from our environment and do their experiments? But that's the thing that fascinates me is, okay, so there's some other thing, there's some small things to unpack here. So they either understand our psychology and they want to address it, and they wanted us to be exposed to them. Or if that's not the case, then they must have had, if they didn't want us to be exposed to them, they must have some flaw in their technology, because if they are so technologically advanced and they do experiments on us, they must have some flaws in their way of doing that made these people remember that, if that makes sense. So if you go down that pathway, either they wanted us to see them, or they wanted the Hills to see them, or they didn't. So if they understand human psychology, then they don't have to worry about if the Hills remember the event to any capacity, because they will have couched it by saying to them, oh, don't worry, we're here to help you, or whatever. Like, you don't have to worry. But your perspective, or your idea, which is, if they didn't understand that, they would just take us out of the environment and not even worry about us, they'd have some technology to not either worry about or not even worry about us being aware of them. So I think that it's super interesting that the aliens themselves in that situation apparently addressed the Hills directly as saying, don't worry, we are here. We're here to help you, or like, we're not going to hurt you at least. And they come back and report that. So I don't know, that can either take away from their argument or their reporting as credible, or it can add to it. But it really depends on what you want to believe and accept the aliens who abducted them, like what level of technology they are currently at. If they reached a level where they could easily take them out of, conscious awareness, or maybe they wanted us to see them. So whatever you believe in that situation,
I think the only difference in this case is that all of these memories were pulled from their subconscious through multiple sessions of hypnosis. And that's where the scrutiny comes from as well.
Right.
For the people that say that they're lying and they're detractors, they say that this was a extreme case of hallucination on their part that came from the stress of being an interracial couple in the 60s. But my only one thing to that claim is that how would they both have the same, I guess, same vision? Yes, the same memories
vision, same
through hypnotherapy. Yeah. I can't say much for hypnotherapy because I've never gone through it.
Right.
But that's going according to hypnotherapy. And if you actually believe that works, I'm not saying whether I do or don't. If you actually believe that works, their memories would have had to have been planted in their subconscious in order for them to have the same thing.
I was just thinking that.
To remember the same thing. But the fact that they were driving down the road,
very interesting.
They see this ship that they thought was a star, and then they see it come closer, and then they lose long tracks of time. I think this is one of the cases where we have to maybe give some credence to what they're saying, because I don't think the Russians are grabbing Betty and Barney Hill and planting.
What about the CIA?
Maybe.
What about the CIA?
But in all seriousness, I don't think there's some sort of psyop going on, because these are just two random middle-aged people driving down rural New Hampshire. From what I understand, they weren't any significant people. They were just regular civilians.
You just brought up you just unpacked something so interesting to me, which is, you can not only think about, and I don't want to get off track, because this episode is supposed to be about aliens and abductions, which I will stay on track, but I just have to briefly say that what I find fascinating, what you brought up, is this concept that memory could have been planted in them for a purpose. So, I mean, we can do a whole other episode about like psychology and state agencies who are trying to manipulate masses. That's one possibility that we'll talk about later, maybe. But if you want to talk about memories being implanted from an alien perspective, I think what's fascinating is you can talk about two different ideas. One is, maybe they did have stress, and maybe there's some kind of like metaphysical connection or bond that humans have on a deep level. Like maybe they talked about, because aliens had been around from, in 1961, they had been around since 47. So like, well over a decade, aliens had been around since the crash of Roswell.
There was,
US,
that one ship or whatever that crashed. Yeah. And then I think, the body was buried there for a while. And then all of a sudden, I don't know if it was, I think it must have been after Roswell or pre-Roswell. Around that time period, the U.S. Army came into the town and sectioned off everything and pretty much exhumed it. Yeah.
Exhumed it.
So we don't know if the body is still there. I would say that it's not.
But same concept. So it's still, even if you go back to the 1890s or whatever, whenever the first instance was reported, it's still relatively fresh and new in American culture. So I think that it's extremely interesting that the idea that the memory planted could have somehow helped proliferate this idea of aliens. So if you talk about this memory being implanted in the Hills, you have to ask, where does that memory come from? It either came from, because like you said, it's shared. So that inherently means that one of three things: either they somehow miraculously or just very, very were able to tightly work on their story together and reach a point where they had it to a T, which is like, I guess it's possible, they planned out and talked about the story beforehand, or the memory was implanted and they didn't really experience the situation, but for whatever reason, that memory was shared, is implanted in them, and they had that same exact story. Or three, it really did happen. And it is really kind of along the lines of what they remember. So if you want to dismiss everything else and agree to the fact that that memory is actually in their brains, you only have two scenarios. One, they really did experience it, or two, somebody implanted that memory in their brains somehow by some means. And I can't imagine a motivation of aliens doing that other than actually, experimenting on them. So you have to kind of incorporate the idea of, maybe they were undergoing some kind of crazy stress from being a biracial couple in the 60s. And they therefore kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, mind melded somehow. And they came up with some shared concept, either subliminally or otherwise. But I guess just moving on, I kind of want to talk about other more recent examples, because I think as we move down the path of alien abduction cases, we might get a better sense of how things have progressed over the last 70 or 80 years if we talk about more current examples. So do you have a current example that you want to bring up about alien abduction that might have happened in the last 20 or 30 years?
That I want to talk about. It's not within the 20 to 30 years, but it's from 1957, and this one comes from Brazil. Antonio Vilas Boas. His story was that he was out in the fields working with his friends one day, and then said that he was taken aboard a spacecraft where he had a sexual encounter with a female extraterrestrial. Now, my thing is, this is one of those where I just have a hard time believing. I really do. What are your thoughts on that one?
Oh man. So first of all, I would say that there's a religious perspective to this, which is people have talked about this idea of succubi, or, I know there's different variations of it. I don't really know a lot about them, but there's the succubus and there's some other one, oculus or whatever, where these creatures or demons or whatever come to people in their sleep and they have sexual relations with them. And I tend to agree with you that if there is any sense of sexual exploitation of human beings coming from aliens in a person's story, then that automatically raises a flag, because we already know that based off of science and theory about science and evolution, that if aliens really are the way that they are, that means that they don't have any sexual reproduction. And this idea that, and I looked this up too, I don't really know a lot about this, but there's a type of alien that is in some of the theories, I think they're called Pleiadians.
The Pleiadians.
Pleiadians. Pleiadians.
Yes, I've heard of those.
From the Pleiades system or whatever. They look awfully like human beings, except they look like kind of elves from Lord of the Rings. They have big eyes, blonde hair, and they clearly have sexual organs based off of these drawings and stuff like that. So, I guess you could really, if you wanted to make a stretch, you can argue, maybe they're less advanced than the Greys and therefore they still have their sexual organs. But it just absolutely blows my mind that human beings will come up with this idea or believe this idea that there are multiple alien races that have somehow avoided interacting with us directly for thousands of years. And the fact that they come down and somehow choose certain people to have sex with. Can I ask you real quick, what did this person look like? Was he in any way attractive?
He just looked
conventionally?
Like your average guy. Yeah, just a normal dude.
A normal dude.
I actually have a description of his encounter. So he said that he was seized by a 5 foot tall humanoid who was wearing gray coveralls and a helmet. Its eyes were small and blue.
I'm just envisioning a situation where he's saying this, but it was just some sexual deviant like who had like a bucket on their head, and he was just like really, he was just like really high or something,
really drunk.
Sorry,
but yeah,
Anyway.
he says that they were wearing gray coveralls and a helmet, so they're probably not the grays that Barney and Betty saw. Instead of speech noise, instead of like actual talking, he said they make noises like barks or yelps. Bleep bloop. Then he said 3 similar beings joined in subduing him and dragging him inside their craft. So this one was pretty violent.
Almighty. That doesn't.
Whereas with Betty and Barney Hill,
this is news to me. Man.
They were just like lifted into the craft or however you want to spin it. This one sounds pretty violent. So Boas said,
I don't think I've ever been so sad and so confused for another human being in my life.
I'm skeptical about it, but he passed away in 1991, and he took this to his grave. He was adamant that this happened to him. So to continue with his story, he said that once he was inside the craft, he said that he was stripped of his clothes and covered from head to toe with a strange gel lube.
Astroglide!
He was then led into a large semicircular room through a doorway that had strange red symbols written over it. The sex chamber. Yeah, the alien sex chamber. In this room, beings took samples of his blood from his chin. And then he was taken to a third room and left alone for a half hour, where they pumped some type of gas into the room, which he claimed that made him very ill. Shortly after that, he said that another humanoid came into the room, but this one was a female, very attractive and very naked. So one could assume that this type of alien probably looked like a human just for the sake of this story. He said that she was the same height as the other beings that he encountered, with small pointed chin and large blue cat-like eyes, kind of like how you described the Pleiadians, right? Minus that these aren't tall. The hair on her head was long and white, somewhat platinum blonde. He said her underarm and pubic hair were bright red. And then he said he just randomly became strongly attracted to the woman, and then they had intercourse. And then he claims that when it was all over, the female smiled at him, rubbed her belly, and gestured pointing upward, which he took that to mean that she was going to raise their child in space. So he also said that the female seemed relieved that their task was over. And Boas himself said that he felt angered by the situation because he felt that he had been a little more than a good stallion for the humanoids.
Wow. Okay, that just completely wrecked every credence of anyway, so there's 2 things there that I find interesting that I want to address. The first one is I feel really bad for this person because there's 2 situations that I can think of. Either this person is lying or this person believes what actually happened. And if this person believes what actually happened, and regardless of whether it happened or not, if this person believes that, they clearly have either stress from the situation of it actually happening, or they have some severe psychological issue that made them think of the story that they believe in. But if he came up with that story on his own and he falsified it and he knew that, fuck him. But also, if he really did believe it or it really did happen, the other thing I find fascinating is this idea that sexual drive and motivation is still very much a part of other alien races,
right?
Or races other than human beings. And think about human beings. Like, we have so many proclivities for sexual experiences, and they're to the degree where more so than ever because of society. Like, if you go back 200 years, nobody will have ever been sexually driven by I don't know. Geez, what's a good example? I mean, you could argue BDSM has been around for a while and foot fetish has been around for a while, but like, what's a good modern example that you wouldn't have seen back then that is a fetish today that would have not been a fetish before? Can you think of one? I'm not sure,
but you'd probably think of some furries.
How about furries? Furries. Yeah. So there are some, and Jesus Christ, you probably just lost half your base. No, I'm just kidding. So, so furries, they essentially like, some furries aren't sexual and some furries are sexual, but the furries that are sexual, they clearly get some kind of sexual drive or motivation from having sex in those costumes or believing that they're having sex in those animal furry costumes. So not to crap on anybody whatsoever for a fetish, because everybody, I really believe everyone has their own right to whatever, as long as it doesn't hurt other people and it's like, mutually agreed upon as being okay. But if you go back like 200 years, furries wasn't a thing. Sexual motivation or drive from furries did not occur because we didn't have the idea of furries back then. So if you kind of copy and paste that from that to the idea of the Pleiadians or whoever is supposedly having sex with this guy, that means that these aliens have some kind of sexual drive or motivation because of what they were doing. Because if they had some kind of technology to pull out his semen and implant her purely for a biological reason, they would have done that. But he's saying that they had actual intercourse. So they either believe that there's some kind of like spiritual or metaphysical thing that happens when they have sex, which means they haven't evolved beyond the technology we think they have, or they have some kind of sexual proclivity for having sex with an ape man. And I wonder if in a situation like that, if it was factual, is that what was happening? Like, were they just, a couple kids going out and having some fun intergalactically on some weekend by sleeping with some farmer in the middle of nowhere who's human, or maybe
from a scientific perspective.
I don't know. There's
those aliens. Let's say his claim is true, right? Let's say I think it might be fabricated, because one point to make about him before I go into what I was initially going to say about the scientific part of it. He was able to remember all of this without psychic like hypnotherapy and like regression therapy. And also there were claims that a similar story was printed in a newspaper before he even had that experience. But the one thing that they say is that he was illiterate at the time, even though he went on to become a lawyer.
I'm sorry, man. I've never heard the story, and this is hilarious to me. I'm sorry. He became a lawyer. He was a farmer, became a lawyer.
So this was probably like in his youth. Like I'd probably say, let's say he was probably 20 years old when that happened, right? So let me see.
Right. Okay. That's fair. I see when I had this in my mind, I pictured like a 53-year-old, like poor farmer, getting slammed by some super hot blonde alien woman. And
he was 23 at the time.
But if he
was
a
23-year-old farmer at the time. 23 when all of that happened.
I find that so interesting because like you can totally tear that down in a different way, which is like, how did that affect his rise to becoming a lawyer? Because he was a farmer originally, and then he somehow pulled himself by his bootstraps. But did that story that he became known for in his 20s, like when did he tell the story? Did he tell the story when he was older or when he was younger after it happened?
I think he told that story in 1958 or so, around the same time that it actually, close to when it happened. Because he essentially what happened, he contacted a journalist, Jose Martins, who then went to contact Olavo Fontes from the National School of Medicine of Brazil.
Awesome names. And
Fontes was in contact with an American UFO research group. And basically when they studied him, the writer Terry Melanson stated that Boas symptoms were pains throughout his body, with nausea, headaches, loss of appetite, ceaselessly burning sensations in the eyes. This went on for months. And essentially the skin surrounding his wounds, it basically showed he had mild radiation sickness. So that throws another curveball, right?
Yeah, where did he get radiation sickness from?
Was there something underground, like on the land he was tilling, that could have gave him radiation sickness? But then that would ask the question, did anyone else get radiation sickness? Because that would have been looked into.
Sure. Well, we do know that radiation sickness can be the cause
Right.
of hallucinations. So, I mean, that's also a possibility as well, where he did get some kind of minor exposure to the point where it didn't kill him, but it did cause him to have enough of a reaction where he, came up with this idea in his head of an hallucination or whatever.
But yeah, so like, what do you think? What do you think about his claim?
But yeah,
I'm kind of skeptical on it. It is a great story. I think it's a great story. And it's something that you could put in like a tabloid like UFO magazine just for entertainment purposes. But the one thing that gets me is that there was a similar story written in a newspaper, which he could have had someone read to him.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, he was able to remember all of this without any type of like hypnotherapy. And what's the one common thing that we see? Like when you watch all of these UFO documentaries, right, about people that get abducted, what's the most common thing they do? They go through hypnotherapy. They go through some sort of hypnosis. This dude remembered everything clear as day.
Right. So
I'm skeptical on his story.
Well, he did become a good lawyer. Well, I don't know if he became a good lawyer, but he became a lawyer. So I don't know. Maybe he's good at bullshitting. You gotta be. So you gotta be. So if you ask me honestly, if I had to say like, based off of his story and everything I know about the situation, I mean, I 3 out of 10 believability. Honestly, I think it's much less believable than the Hills case that we talked about. And this might be a good segue to break into a question I have for you, Chris, which is something that we haven't really talked about over the years. We've talked about ghost stories,
right?
We've talked about weird occurrences that you've experienced on that side, the spiritual side, which, by the way, is fascinating to me because if you believe in aliens and you believe in ghosts, they have to both exist in the same world. So what does that mean? Anyway, spiritually or whatever. So, but my question to you, Chris, is what have you ever had an experience with any type of sightings or aircraft, like unexplained UFOs or unidentified aerial phenomenon, what they call them now? Or seeing aliens or anything like that?
I'd say the most like the closest thing I probably saw was like some lights in the sky that were that didn't look like planes. They were following me and my mom, and then we got home and that was the end of it. And my buddy that I talked to, that I did a podcast with him before, he said he's seen the same thing when he was younger, in the sense that like he saw some lights in the sky, something moving like in a fashion that a plane or a helicopter wouldn't be able to move. But given that we were so young when it happened, it's like I couldn't pull up my iPhone and record it, like I didn't have any of the technology at the time. So for me, I would chalk it up to just maybe spotlights or an airplane or something like that. I can't really definitively outright say it was a UFO or aliens or something like that. But what about you?
Well, I don't know. I've had some interesting situations, and I don't think any of them are for sure pertaining to alien spacecraft, but I do have 3 quick stories that I'll tell just out of interest and in case you have any questions for them. But like, so no, thank God. So the first interesting one happened when I was really young. I think I might have been like 9 or 10. And I used to live in Western Pennsylvania in a small town not too far away from Pittsburgh, maybe like an hour or so away from Pittsburgh. So Western PA. And I would go outside of my parents' house, at nighttime in the summer and whatnot, and just kind of hang out, enjoy the air in the summer and just relax outside right before bed. And there was one time when I sat down on this hill next to our back door, and I was kind of just lying down, thinking about life, like laying up at the stars or whatever, relaxing. And I saw this like blob of just utter blackness. It looked like it was dark enough in the sky. There was no full moon, so it was really dark in the sky, but not too dark so you couldn't see the clouds. So I could make out the clouds barely right after dusk, like right when it was getting dark. But I remember very clearly seeing a huge oval-shaped, super dark, unlit object floating overhead. And it just absolutely, to this day, I think about what I saw in my memory. and what I remember about that situation, marking it in my memory, it just absolutely blew my mind. Thinking about it now, it was just huge. Only thing I could think of that it could possibly have been, that if it wasn't some, man-made object, if it was a spacecraft or not, but it could have been a blimp, I guess. It was blimp shaped, but the creepy thing was that it had no lights on it whatsoever. You would expect a blimp to have some kind of flashing light or some kind of light from the cockpit underneath the balloon. But it was just this massive blob of a floating object that was pure darkness going right over our house. And I will not forget that because it was really creepy. Second story real quick. I woke up one night one early morning, I think like 3 a.m. when I was younger. I was probably like 12 or 13. I saw like a lizard humanoid creature standing at the foot of my bed.
Lizard people? You saw lizard people? Oh, this is amazing.
Yes.
Right, go on.
Just hear me out, man. Just hear me out. I swear on my family that I have a memory where I woke up and at the foot of my bed, there was like a 6 foot tall, like lizard humanoid creature just staring at me. I don't remember exactly what color it was or if it was wearing clothes, but I very, very clearly remember it had a lizard face and a lizard body, but it was standing up like a human being. So, however, it only lasted like 5 seconds or 6 seconds before I fell back asleep. And I will caution and say that this isn't the only time in my life where I had like a waking hallucination. I really honestly believe that I probably saw something that scared the shit out of me when I was a kid, and I just happened to like superimpose that subliminally as I was waking up. Because there was actually another time where I woke up and I saw Chucky, the little doll who kills people. I saw him at the foot of my bed, very clear as day, as I opened my eyes. And there have been a handful of times where I opened my eyes and I saw like a giant spider like floating down on top of me, like literally a giant spider like the size of a frying pan coming down over my body as I was waking up. And the very first time I had sleep apnea, when I was really young, I heard a rattlesnake and I woke up and I couldn't move. And that was terrifying to me. Like when I woke up, like I heard a rattlesnake, like and then I literally couldn't move my body as I was waking up. And I'm like, what the fuck is happening to me? I'm an adolescent and I can't move my body. Did a snake bite me and I can't move? So though I really think that the lizard vision thing was probably just sleep apnea, or like not sleep apnea, but sleep hallucination coming out of sleep. So, but that was super creepy and super interesting.
I think you might have.
Have you ever had sleep apnea,
sleep
by the way?
paralysis, my friend? So I'm assuming when you were a kid, you would have watched like the Spider-Man TV show and stuff like that. What you described remind me of, absolutely, you remember the lizard guy, Dr. Connors? It could be a possibility. Now, I'm not doubting that you didn't see the lizard people. I wouldn't be surprised like if you probably saw an episode of Spider-Man that day and it was one of those episodes where he's fighting Dr. Connors, the lizard.
Yes.
And then you kind of remembered that. Like that was probably the last thing on your mind thinking about it when you went to bed that night.
Right.
Just to give like a potential like logical answer, because I've had sleep paralysis once. It was fairly recent, actually, probably maybe like 2 months ago, but I didn't see anything because the way that I was positioned, like I sleep on my like left side and my eyes were like looking down at my blanket. Mm-hmm. So even if there was anything there, I wouldn't have seen it. But I do know what you mean. Like I woke up, like I could move my eyes around, but I just couldn't move. So I completely understand and sympathize with that. But I think the fact that you had multiple instances in which you saw different things, you woke up and your brain was kind of like still in your dream state, and whatever you were seeing in your dream might have just like been projected
totally agree.
Mentally.
Let's hope so, because I really would rather have that. I would really rather have that being the case than actually seeing a lizard.
Yeah, that actually would be really terrifying. But speaking of lizard people, there is this one guy. Oh my God, what is his name? Oh my God, it's escaping my mind. David Icke. He is adamant that there are like lizard people running the world. Like covertly.
Not just here, but running the world.
Yeah, like they're like these shape-shifting like reptilians that have infiltrated the upper echelons of society, and they affect the way that, you know, humanity goes, because apparently humanity drove them underground. But I don't want to get too far into that. Let's get back to the
Sorry, okay. Wait a minute. Wait, there's so much to unpack there. I'm sorry. Can I just say really quickly, if lizard creatures controlled the world, but they were somehow driven by people driving them underground, wouldn't that inherently take away their power? You know, like if we were able to drive them underground, why would they feel?
Dude, we can have an entire podcast on David Icke. We definitely
can do a whole podcast.
It's really intriguing. Absolutely. If you look at his lectures, like he really goes in depth about it. Like there's some things that he gets right. Mm-hmm. Don't hate on.
So Tolkien. Does Tolkien,
but.
Sorry, I'm not. No. I'm saying that like Tolkien came up with some really incredible, you know, very deep concepts that were fiction. And I'm just saying that people, if human beings can come, if Tolkien is a human and he came up with that depth of fiction that's amazing, then other people who are trying to bullshit other people into lies.
Yeah,
can do the same
that is
thing.
a really
just
good
saying.
point. And the thing with Tolkien is that all of his like writings and stuff came from his experience in the trenches of World War One. But to segue into another alien abduction story, there's another guy. He came out in 2002. It's Peter Corey. Peter Corey. Let's go with that. Okay. So in 1992, he's from Australia. This is another one that reported a sexual encounter with aliens. He said that he was abducted by female extraterrestrial beings in 1992. He reported a sexual encounter with one of the entities and provided physical evidence in the form of hair samples. These samples were analyzed and found to have unique DNA characteristics. But people came out and said, like, this is fake. Like, the results have been contested. But this is one case where it's like, okay, this dude is actually providing physical evidence.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so DNA evidence. I'm gonna actually. Let me take 1 second because I'm just curious now. When did DNA evidence become common in court, admissible in court? 1986 is when DNA evidence started becoming
6 years later
admissible in court, which is only 6 years later. Let me guess. After they did that test, which was probably a relatively new test, that hair happened to disappear. What happened to that hair? Did anybody hold on to it?
I can't really say definitively.
I was going to say, if it did disappear, that'd be very interesting because he probably had it in his possession, that he had testing done on it. And if it disappeared, then there'd be no way to tell for sure. That's inconclusive to me. Like there's no way to tell for sure because that's so close to the time period when DNA evidence testing was just coming online that I really can't say. Because you say that it had like unique properties and whatnot, but if DNA testing was so new and we're still learning about it, even like 20 plus years later, that to me just says that you can't take that with a grain of, you know, you have to take that with a grain of salt.
I'm inclined to agree with that. But there is one person that I did want to talk about who is actually, this is like this is present day. You ever hear of Bridget Nielsen?
I think, let me see real quic. Yes. Yeah. That was the other, was that a third sexual encounter?
So she has claimed to have had experiences related to alien, abductions.
The hybrid.
She shared that her story through like media platforms and everything like that. She's like this holistic type of healer type of thing. She described her experiences as encounters with extraterrestrial beings, including communication and interaction with different types of entities. So not just one set of aliens. I don't know if we take entities as spiritual beings as well. She does talk about hybrid children, spiritual awakening, multidimensional realities, all of things that she's seen and have experienced. And it's good to note that the scientific community like approaches like people like her, no shade to her, that make such claims with skepticism because it's just based off of their word. And as we've seen thus far with the few examples that we had, it seems like, what did we discuss? At least 3 examples. We had the Betty and Barney Hill. We had the gentleman from Brazil. And then we had the other guy from 1992. 2 out of the 3 seem a little far-fetched to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And this one as well, because I mean, just based off of what I'm learning about her right now, she's talking about as soon as someone talks about multiple alien races coexisting on the same planet let's face it, we are much, much smarter than apes, clearly, and we have technologically advanced capabilities compared to apes. But if you're talking about aliens who have intergalactic space travel, why in the holy crap would they even bother with us? I mean, even if it was just out of experimentation, you could argue that, but you're talking about a person who's saying that they spliced their DNA with her DNA. And that is something that is irrefutably testable. So we live in 2023 where we could easily do some kind of DNA-based testing that incorporates knowledge or information that comes from something like CRISPR or some other, gene. We understand genes and DNA more than we ever have in our entire civilization. So for her to come out and say that, I would have to see some definitive testing to say that she actually does have some unique properties in her. But even if she does have some kind of mildly interesting properties in her, I would still come back to the idea of why. It's all about motive. If these aliens are so advanced, and they're only here for testing us, what other motivation could they possibly have if they're so advanced? Why would they mess with, apes or their ape equivalent? Why would they mess with us to even splice their genes with us to I don't know.
People have made the claim, like UFO experts have made the claim, that the reason that aliens tend to do this, to try to make hybrids, is because maybe that their race is dying out and there's some infertility or something that makes them no longer compatible. Okay. That might be their motive. Or maybe they might be trying to take over. This is just me putting my tinfoil hat on. Take over humanity through hybrid aliens that look exactly like us.
Now, when you say take over, do you mean completely erase any sense of human DNA over the course of like tens of thousands of years? Or do you mean create leaders among us who are spliced or alien hybrids who can control us?
If we look at humans and how we function, I would say probably the leader route, or create these hybrids that could then turn into those individuals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because if you do agree with that, if you do think that that's the route that you would think is most likely, I would say that there has to be a motive behind doing so. And at this point, we're already speculating because we don't know anything about aliens and we don't know if aliens are real. But like, if you get to that point of like speculating about speculation, then you would have to say like, what would be the motivation? And so your motivation, you're saying that to advance their alien race. But I feel like if aliens have the capability to retromorph anything whatsoever at their disposal to the point where they can manipulate human DNA, and they have intergalactic travel, then why would they not just like fix their DNA or create some kind of like synthetic hybrid? Or even more interestingly, which is another theory, why would they not just create like robotic beings that could last 1 million years where they can just upload their consciousness into? Because that's also a theory, right? Because some people have floated the idea that grays are actually synthetic. And they're just so-called puppets being controlled from a distance by an actual physical race of beings 1 million light years away. And the grays themselves aren't actually composed of any biodegradable or biological components.
That would make sense, because when you interact with a new environment, let's say we go to a different planet and it has a breathable atmosphere and it already has life on it, one thing that we haven't accounted for is the bacteria on that planet. So if the Greys are abducting people and they're running all of these experiments, and according to claims, they don't wear any clothes, they don't wear any protective gear, that would make sense that they're some sort of artificial vessel. Because being exposed to our bacteria and our germs, one could assume that they could potentially die from it, unless they develop their technology in the sense that wherever they're performing these experiments or their ships are highly sterilized consistently. Like there's just a consistent sterilization process that kills any bacteria that would be harmful for them.
Yeah, I think that it's more likely that a super advanced race of intelligent beings would have come up with some kind of like technological advancement. Because think about the technological advancement that human beings have experienced in the last like 100 years or so. The transformer, the car, the communication device, the radio, and now, you know, all the way up to wireless communication and Wi-Fi. Like that's only 200 years. Imagine a race of beings that have been around for 10,000 plus years as an advanced modern race who, or not a modern race, but an advanced race who had some kind of form of technology and electro engineering understanding to the point where they can kind of create their own, like you said, method of filtering out some kind of austere environment. I think it's more likely that any beings that are visiting us are some kind of not biological, but mechanical or robotic or whatever you want to call it type of being.
Yeah.
So
and to go back to Nielsen for a second, she believes that millions of women around the globe are mothers to hybrid children without knowing it, and that aliens are abducting the wombs of pregnant women.
Interesting. So you think that in that situation, the biological component means that either the aliens are delivering their biology to us through some kind of like robotic or technological vessel that is not a biological vessel, or do you think that they're doing it in real time as a biological vessel, like they themselves are actually biological and they are injecting themselves into us?
I think for the sake of entertaining her example of wombs being abducted from women by aliens, which I think is a little bit of a stretch, they might be taking it, putting it in some sort of like cryo chamber or something like that, and splicing the DNA with theirs. If that makes sense. You ever watch Batman Beyond back in the day?
Yeah, that does.
Yeah, where like people would splice their DNA to become like humanoid animals, like people would be like tigers and stuff like that. So that's what comes to mind when I hear of that womb abduction.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think honestly, like the whole concept of injecting alien DNA into humans, I think it's definitely interesting, but at the same time, personally, I feel like if they had the capability, they would just take our DNA and do whatever they wanted with it. Like, unless they wanted complete control over our planet and they couldn't achieve that by themselves in their own technology. I mean, that's the only situation I could think of where they would want to kind of create but then again, like if they created hybrids, who's to say that it's not some kind of like movie-esque scenario where in the future, you know, these hybrids who are part human, part alien don't resonate more with the human beings who are of this planet and end up turning on their alien parents. You know what I mean? So that doesn't seem like a foolproof plan for alien takeover. So it just seems awfully convoluted and difficult to accept.
The only thing I
could
think of for them to do that is a way to expand their race. All right, I'm going to have to go to Mesopotamia, right? The Sumerians. In their creation myth, they believe that the Anunnaki came down and created humans from their DNA. They took the egg of a Homo erectus female and inserted, like, did their splicing or whatever to create humans as we have them today, to use them as slaves, right? Because according to the creation myth, the Anunnaki, their planet Nibiru, like, lives off of gold, and Earth is abundant in gold. So according to that Sumerian creation myth, just to entertain the idea of like this alien hybrid talk, potentially they have some sort of purpose that these hybrids can probably survive in some sort of environment to complete some sort of task, perhaps mining, maybe a military of hybrids that they couldn't do themselves.
Right. And I think that this is actually probably one of my absolute favorite. If I had to pick a theory about ancient aliens,
right, it's the most sensible.
Because I think it's the most, yeah, absolutely. It's the most sensible and plausible, and the most unfortunate for us, because if aliens really did come down and retrofit ape DNA to create human beings for the purpose of like making them intelligent enough to mine gold for their intergalactic starfleet, and then they just like got the gold they needed and just effing like left, like that would be, first of all, that would be really tragic and kind of funny, but like mostly tragic that we were left to advance on our own. But I think I agree with you, like that is probably the most likely. But then you have to go back and say, why do we continue to have stories of aliens? If they came here in the Sumerian culture, when was the Sumerian culture?
5,000 years ago?
4,000 BC? Okay, so like 3,000 BC-ish. If they came around that time period, why 5,000 years from then would we still have sightings and stories about aliens showing up and probing us or whatever? So I always think about like the ultimate question I always go back to, which is, what is the motivation? So in that case, the motivation is they altered ape DNA to get them gold so they could build their intergalactic or sustain their intergalactic starfleet with like the required materials or whatever. But at the same time, what's the motivation behind them staying? Because if you want to agree to the fact that aliens are still here, then you either have to give in to the idea that there are multiple races visiting us, or the same race is visiting us. But if they came here to mine gold and they got their gold, why would they stay? So, I mean, I always go back to the point of motivation.
Just before we segue into the next abduction story that I wanted to talk about, to answer your question, from my perspective, I think that maybe it's not the same civilization coming back. Or maybe even if it is, they've kind of realized, okay, like they've gotten to the point where, one, they're very hostile, which we are. Anytime we see like UFOs or something like that, the first thing we do is scramble the jets. We don't have a welcoming party. And two, probably just for curiosity, because I don't want to stay too long on the Sumerians and the Anunnaki, but if they did create humanity according to the Sumerian creation myth, right? And they created them and then they left, possibly observation to see how their experiment has evolved over time in the span of that 5,000 years. Kind of like what we do with lab mice, right? I'm not saying I agree with it, but I was watching something yesterday on The Unexplained with Bill Shatner, and this lab scientist was talking about them planting like PTSD memories into lab mice. I don't know how they do it, but like just the constant observation, if that makes any sense.
I think that this whole concept of like constant observation is, there's some kind of like scientific utility in watching us for longer. So in that situation, it's totally possible. Like, you know, maybe they did need gold, and maybe they did want to run an experiment, and the getting of the gold from the Anunnaki, or it's not the Anunnaki, the Sumerians, maybe that was just like a supplemental benefit to their decision of advancing ape DNA. Like maybe the primary goal was to do a scientific experiment about how the evolution would take place, but then like the kind of like the side hustle was, oh, let's just get them to like, you know, let's start out with mining gold and see how they do, because we need gold anyway. and we can't easily extract gold because of our fragile bodies, and the technology we have doesn't make it easy to penetrate and pull out that gold resource. So let's get them to spend their energy and their resources pulling out the gold for us. In the meantime, we'll wait for that to bear fruit. But at the grander scheme of things, we'll watch them evolve. We'll do this scientific experiment. So it could be like a kind of like a mutually or like a multiple beneficial venture for them to pursue.
And
I
if
totally
you want
agree that's
like
possible.
a live example that we have now, there are indigenous people around the world that have not been contacted directly. Like there's like tribes in Brazil. There's that island off the coast of India, right? In the Indian Ocean, that if anyone goes to it, they basically kill you. I can't remember the name of the island, but this one missionary guy, he went there and they just lit his ass up with arrows. But yeah, like we observe them from afar. We don't directly interact with them. So who's to say that if there are aliens out there or the Anunnaki out there, that they're just not observing us and our habitat, if that makes sense.
Right.
But what I did want to talk about, segue into next, was the Linda Napolitano story. So she claims that she experienced an abduction in 1989. And that she, according to Napolitano, she was allegedly taken from her 12th floor apartment in New York City and transported onto a UFO. She described encountering 3 extraterrestrial beings and being taken aboard their craft. She claimed to observe a larger alien figure in a position of authority in the abduction. Several witnesses, including a United Nations diplomat, allegedly saw the incident from their respective locations. However, these witnesses chose to remain anonymous and were not independently verified. Her story is highly debated. Skeptics point out inconsistencies and lack of concrete evidence. I feel like it would be really hard to have concrete evidence of an alien abduction, to be honest with you. But yeah, according to her, she said that she encountered humanoid and reptilian beings. You're lizard people, man. What do you make of her claim? That the fact that they're already refuting her, and the fact that there was like someone from a United Nations diplomat saying they witnessed a UFO that same night.
My immediate thought is why would aliens who are trying to be diplomatic after hundreds of plus years of experiencing human interaction off and on through different people, why would they choose a random woman in Manhattan to be the primary or one of the primary diplomatic missions when they could just easily go to someone who actually
I don't think they were approaching her for diplomacy.
Or in one of the many governments.
It was a UN diplomat saw
because
the same craft that night that she claimed. Yeah.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay. So that's the point you're saying, which is so that the UN diplomat is someone who is verifiable or someone who has some kind of like credibility. Right. Okay. Yeah, honestly, I mean, like if she was abducted in the middle of Manhattan, I mean, does it say where she was abducted?
Yeah,
was
New York City. She was in
New
her
York
12th
City
floor apartment, apparently. I feel like there would be a lot of people. 1989, November, holiday season. Yeah, people are out and about. I'm a native New Yorker, so when they say that city never sleeps, it never sleeps. It's always busy.
I've been there for sure, man, and I agree with you. It's just absolutely crazy. But I think that if someone really was abducted in like pretty much downtown New York or close to downtown New York, like why in the world would no one have seen that? And if aliens were trying to be careful of not being seen, why would they choose such a target? I mean, the only thing I could think of is like maybe there's like a time-based component, like I need to abduct this woman because of her genetic makeup in this time period or in this exact moment in order to get what I want. That's the only motivation I could think about for them acting on a situation like that. Otherwise, like if aliens really wanted to stay anonymous and they didn't have a time-based need to get somebody abducted, why would they just not wait like a year or two until she like left on vacation somewhere more remote? So
that one is apparently she has a book out there. You could actually find it online. It might be in Kindle format, possibly. So if you interested in reading that and then reporting back to us, we wouldn't mind. But yeah, that's another one where this one I'll give a 5 out of 10. The Betty and Barney Hill I'll probably give maybe a 6 or 7. But this one I have to give a 5. And the only reason it gets a 5 out of 10 is because a credible person, a person whose reputation determines whether they have a job or not, a UN diplomat. Like that, for them to say like, hey, put their reputation on the line, essentially put their job on the line, saying like, yeah, I saw it too. I think that gives it some credence, but I can't definitively say. So for me, this one's a 5 out of 10.
Here's an interesting question. What would make the perfect, I mean, aside from aliens coming down and saying, here we are, we're right in front of you. We're making contact. Other than that scenario, what would you say would be like an 8 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10 scenario? Is there any kind of like alien proof that you've ever seen in the media that has kind of tipped the balance in the favor of like, this being more likely
there
than
is
not?
one that happened. I think it was in the 90s. Remember those Arizona lights? That was seen. Okay. Was it Arizona or was it New Mexico? I can't really. I think it was Arizona as well.
I think it was Arizona.
That it caught so much traction and attention that there were 911 calls, and that I believe it was the governor himself had to make a statement, but they got a lot of flack for it because they had someone dress in an alien costume and brought him on stage like in handcuffs.
Yes.
But something like that.
Oh God.
Yes, that like hundreds of people see it like at the dead of night. That you can't really refute. And the stuff with which we could talk about this on a whole other podcast, the claims of that Bob Lazar had made for when he worked for the government on I think he worked, was it Area 51? I think he might have, or one of those other bases that actually had alien technology that they were responsible. He was partly responsible for reverse engineering it. And what's interesting about Bob Lazar, I won't get stuck on him for too long. If you want to hear more of it, he was on the Joe Rogan podcast for a couple of hours. That's a really good listen. I'd recommend that one. He essentially, like whatever he described about the facility, the people that he worked with, everything was all 100% accurate. So yeah, like cases like that, where there's official scientific and military involvement, that I can believe. And the guy that quote unquote killed himself in the 90s for outing that there were like bad aliens or something like that, and he was attacked by aliens like going underground, and a black beret like sacrificed his life so he could survive. I don't know.
What is a black beret? I've never heard of black beret.
The way I think he was a black beret. I don't know. Some sort. No. It was something like, according to him, super top secret. Yeah, it might have been Green Beret.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard of black beret before. Interesting.
So it might have been like a joint operation type of thing. Stuff that like we can't really say definitively. But if you want to call it a Green Beret, but whatever it was whatever this person was a special forces soldier. And according to this gentleman, what was his name?
By the way, with the Arizona, they're called the Phoenix Lights. I remember an explanation that somebody had come up with a long time ago was they were flares that were disappearing like slowly over the mountain range that exists over the range. But I can't find that explanation anywhere in open media anymore. Like there's a mountain range in the background, and the argument is like some military aircraft popped a bunch of flares and they were falling from the aircraft line and they were slowly disappearing past the mountain range. So people saw the flares falling down past behind the mountain, but I can't find that explanation anywhere. That's driving me nuts.
So the guy's name was Phil Schneider. And if you look up one of his lectures, I think it's his last lecture, his hand is all mangled and everything, and he shows his scars that he got from that encounter. I think it was like the Dulce, like underground base, something of that sort. I think that's what you might have called it. So basically his story goes was that the US government and governments around the world have contact with these aliens. They're kind of hostile, and he goes down this like elevator with all these special forces guys to go do something down underground in the Dulce base. And then all of a sudden they're attacked by a hostile alien, and he suffers wounds. The other people die. And this one special forces guy who he called, I think it maybe a Green Beret or a Black Beret, some sort of special forces, kind of shoved him back onto the elevator and hit the button to go back up and sacrificed his life for him. What's interesting is that shortly after he gave this lecture, his last lecture, he turned up dead. And they said that he committed suicide. But upon like investigating how he died, it was clearly obvious that he did not kill himself.
I really do believe that there are things in this world that certain people want kept from the general population, because we can either interpret them in a certain way or interpret them as they really are, and most people, the masses, would get pissed off or upset about them. And that goes back to this whole concept of aliens visiting us in general, which is, the government or governments in the world have all agreed, or whoever's in power has agreed, that if there's some kind of ultimate truth to our reality that comes out, whether it's aliens or, some kind of like virtual reality or whatever truth, like crazy truth you want to think about, as even if it's religious, whatever, like that means that there's a party above us who's in control, or not in control of us directly, but who has control over communications or whatever, mass movement, who doesn't want most people to find out this information, because that would mean that it would be the destabilization of humanity. But that's kind of, in a way, isn't that kind of like a little bit benevolent, or like, isn't that a little bit good in a sense? Like, if people are in power who don't want civilization to learn something because it would destabilize us and ruin our civilization or society, unless there was an ultimate end goal to using our society in a nefarious way, why? I mean, it wouldn't be completely evil if they were protecting the structure of society. I mean, I guess you could argue that maybe like they're also human beings. They are also human beings who are trying to control because they don't want their assets to be destroyed or reduced. But even if that's the case, like they understand that humanity has to stay together and bonded and structured and not fall apart. So this whole concept of like people being eliminated and killed, I'm not saying it's justifiable in any way whatsoever. I'm just saying, like, I have to ask the question, if people are being killed for the knowledge they have about the true nature of existence, then why in the world, what would be the motivation behind that by the people who are doing the killing?
I would say for the consolidation of their power, because you brought up the whole for selfish.
But to what end though?
I mean,
to keep their own assets, or to control the population, or like,
yeah,
what?
It could be a multitude of things.
I mean? Like,
I'd say it's probably money driven, asset driven. That would be the most logical explanation. Because to me, if you if you unveil to the public that, hey, there's extraterrestrial life, there's an advanced civilization out there that we have direct contact with, that, helped us advance technologically, and they're out there, and this is who they are, and they're coming on this date to open an official line of communication with the public, I think you'll see people having a shift. So, okay, you'll have your people that are batshit fucking crazy. Like most people say, they'll have their militias that are out in the backwoods preparing for a fight that they can't fucking win. Because you can't find a civilization that has mastered travel of the stars.
Spears versus missiles.
I think if that did happen, we would be put in a situation where, if that happened today, I think most of society would accept it. It'd be like, oh, We fucking knew it. We knew it.
Sure.
To me, that would be the overall reaction of 99.99% of the people. You'll have the tinfoil hat people that think these extraterrestrials are demons. But I think majority of the people would say, okay,
right.
Well, fuck you guys that are in power. We want to interact with the motherfuckers that can travel the stars, not you. And then the economic structure that these powers have built would collapse in on itself.
Now here's a terrifying concept, though. Even if most people are ready to accept the idea that aliens exist, that doesn't inherently mean that our society economically will be okay. So please believe me, man, I am not defending. I think free knowledge and truth about existence is more important. But I think it's like ripping a Band-Aid off. If we were to like learn that knowledge, I think it would be a destabilization of society, but only for a short time to our eventual benefit. So I am inclined to agree with you. If there is any control over what we interpret as our true reality, over what aliens are, doing here or not, if they are benevolent and people are human beings are controlling them here, it is for the nefarious human beings' benefit, which is holding on to their assets and not destabilizing society economically. But I think that, there are some instances, there are some cases where there's a sign where aliens are benevolent and they're trying to advance our society in a positive way. But human beings who have technology to deflect them in some degree are trying to do so because they don't want to risk the destabilization of society. And I think there's plenty of cases out there in the world of like strategic or like global alien examples. Like there's that one video where there's some kind of like alien spacecraft coming to the planet from a distance, and we like the audio or the visual, or sorry, not the audio, the visual captured a shot being fired at it and it moving out of the way or whatever. I think that if that's the case, that's more likely than the aliens being evil and trying to take over us. I think if anything is happening, it's probably human beings who are in control are being stupid and being fearful, and they're trying to control the engagement to the degree because they're so afraid of human beings being like just destabilized and ruining the economy or whatever, which is totally possible. But I think that it would only be a temporary issue.
To counter the point about the economy, if it ever happens, extraterrestrial contact happens, right? With this hyper advanced civilization concept of an economy, to me, it's a figment of our imagination that's man-made. That's how we understand and how we you can't go and touch the economy.
Absolutely.
When I see like we're in national debt of trillions and trillions of dollars, I'm like, who the fuck do we owe this money to? Fucking the Decepticons? Do we owe this money to the fucking Decepticons?
China. Yeah.
Is Megatron gonna come down if we hit a certain threshold and like blow up the planet? Like this whole freaking concept that has been built for thousands and thousands of years, this whole economic concept of putting value on an item to obtain another item to elevate you above another person will completely implode on itself. Because to me, this is just me speculating and based off of, the Star Trek theory, right? Like the Federation, like they have replicators, they have unlimited energy sources, they have warp cores, they have all of this recyclable energy that essentially gives them what they want, and there's no more use for money. And I think that's exactly what would happen. And the people in power would be like, oh shit, they would come to the realization that they're actually human beings and they're not gods.
I was just thinking about this the other day. Like there have been, I don't know the exact names of the people, but there were like maybe one or two stories in the last couple of weeks where like some super rich individual who built their wealth over 30, 40 years in whatever industry, and they were like titans of their industry. They were like multimillionaires, billionaires, or whatever. They just passed away, right? So I was thinking about this idea where just like you can imagine a situation where you as an individual comes in front of some kind of financial opportunity to advance you and your family way beyond your means, like winning the lottery or something. But like, what if you were an individual who was right behind the person in line who bought the lottery ticket and you knew it? You know, it's like that. It's like these millionaires and billionaires who are dying in the last few years or so up through this very day. Like, they have the financial capacity they're right on the precipice of our society figuring out a way to make humans last for hundreds, if not thousands of years longer with like whatever biological engineering or uploading a consciousness into some kind of program. Like there's all kinds of ways that are coming onto the table nowadays where people, if you can afford it, you can last for a super long time. So I think about it from the same perspective. Like, these people are fighting and scraping to keep on, like, hold on to their assets in the face of these possible aliens who are alive for like tens of thousands, if not a million years, because their bodies are synthetic or able to be regenerated. Maybe there are only like 100 gray aliens in existence who have been around for tens of thousands of years because they have set up a rule to where they don't engage or expand in a certain way, or they don't biologically engage with any other human being or any other beings, where they just keep their number very, very tight. So I think that this period we're living in, where it's the possibility where human beings who are in power are trying to control these assets that they have and trying to control their immediate future, they end up shooting the rest of humanity in the foot, because it will help the rest of humanity, but it certainly won't help them, because they're right on the precipice of advancing their lives for a long time or forever, but they're not there yet. So maybe there's one final push to where we see this issue, and then maybe aliens will become more open in society after that idea dies out with the rest of those human beings who are pushing for it.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of The Wandering Road. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and share with your friends. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to you joining me for the next one.